Oye, tío, these moves I've been learning make me feel so cool, almost like Batman. Oye, cabezón, Batman's a fascist. What is up, everybody? RandomRandomMan here, bringing you my review for Blue Beetle. Based on the DC Comics character of the same name, the plot of this superhero film basically follows college graduate Jaime Reyes, played by Sholo Maridueña, who becomes the symbiotic host of an alien scarab with a suit of armor that's capable of extraordinary and unpredictable powers, forever changing his destiny as he becomes the superhero known as Blue Beetle. Going into this movie, I had moderate expectations. This is the 14th film in the DCEU, and to put it lightly, with the recent slate of movies we have gotten in the franchise, they have not been hitting it big at the box office, nor have audiences really connected to them. The general consensus seems to be that audiences are comic book / superheroed out in terms of movies, whether it is DC or Marvel, and we're all waiting for the eventual reset of the brand with James Gunn and Peter Safran at the helm after this movie and the Aquaman sequel later this year, if we are indeed getting it. I mean, anything seems to go right now with the uncertain state of Hollywood and the actors and writers currently striking, who I continue to stand in solidarity with. Keep fighting that good fight. Now back to Blue Beetle. In terms of him as a character, my prior knowledge of him is pretty limited. I only know him from his appearance in the cartoon Batman the Brave and the Bold from about a decade and a half ago. So that is where it ends in terms of me knowing too much about him until now this movie has come along. This was originally supposed to be sent straight to streaming on HBO Max, or now just Max, but has been bestowed the honor of playing in theaters around the world, which could either be a good thing in having him become a fan favorite among the DC slate, or it could be a bad thing with that said DC slate and continuing on with the string of misses, at least in terms of box office, that they have been having. My expectations, as I said, were moderate because in terms of how it does look, it looked like it wasn't going to do anything that different or new, aside from it following a Mexican family and the lead being of Mexican descent. So it did have some of my interest to see for that. But in any sense, I decided to give this movie a chance as I had the day off today, and I was luckily able to head out and see this thing in theaters where it is only currently available. By the way, shout out to my local chain, Classic Cinemas, for giving me a free ticket for my birthday from last week that I used to see this movie. Starting out with the cast and their performances, we have Sholo Maridueña as Jaime Reyes / the titular superhero. Now, I've never seen Maridueña in anything prior to this movie, but right off the bat, he is one of the best parts of this movie in being able to lead it all the way, and also the connection he has with the rest of his cast that plays his family. He has the good looks and charm that a character like this would have, freshly graduating from college and now struggling to find a job and also having some personal struggles with his family at home. And then once he does become the Blue Beetle, he's very reluctant, he's very hesitant, he doesn't know what the hell is going on completely with how he has been bestowed these powers. But I think that adds on to how he is able to carry this movie and being someone who is easily able to be followed and identified with, not just because I personally am of Mexican descent. And speaking of that, we have the rest of the Reyes family, which includes Adriana Barraza, who is Mexican acting royalty as Nana, Jaime's abuelita slash grandma, who has a lot of fun with this role and is a big part of the heart. There's also Belissa Escobedo as Milagro, Jaime's snarky younger sister, Dunnet-Alcocer and Elpidia Carrillo as Jaime's padres or parents. These three I all really liked and had more to do than I initially expected. And then we have George Lopez as Jaime's Uncle Rudy, and I loved this guy ever since childhood. I grew up watching his sitcom, and he is just a legend in terms of the Chicano and Mexican American group. And with what he does here, he easily has a lot of the comedy relief moments with lines that he spouts out. But it's not just one note, like with that one line heard in the trailer of Batman being a fascist. His character is paranoid that the government's watching him or that he's always being seen everywhere. And I think that his connection with Jaime in particular, I think also works in a heart-to-heart moment and just connecting with the whole rest of the family angle. And finally, of this crop of characters, we have Bruno Marchesine as Jenny, the niece of the CEO of this company that is trying to use the Scarab for nefarious measures, with her aunt being the movie's villain. And I liked her gleaming screen presence here. She elevated the material that was given to her and basically being broken down to the romantic interest of Jaime, which I wasn't so big on given the circumstances that the characters do meet in, and as the movie progresses, that whole angle is played up more. It is no fault of the actors at all, but I thought it brought out some tropes that the movie had in its writing, which I'll get to. But I think that Marchesine and the rest of the cast here, especially Maridueña, and what they do, they help this movie bring itself up in emphasizing that aforementioned theme of familia. And now getting into the writing, which was done by Gareth Dunnet-Alcocer. It is an origin story, which is par for the course for a lot of comic book slash superhero movies that have characters that haven't really been exposed too much into the mainstream, with this also being the first Latino superhero film, at least in live action as far as I know. And right off the bat, the biggest issue I have with the movie is that it's clearly cliched on paper and in some of the execution of what we see. It has a case of originitis, and that some of the hallmarks of what we see in somebody becoming a superhero are put into play, and almost anything you can think of from the last decade and a half of the genre is put in here. A likable lead, a relatable lead, especially with the whole Latino, more specifically Mexicano angle of him and his family. But then once he gets these powers and suits up, first it plays out like a horror film of sorts. The opening title sequence also further hints at or shows some visual background to the alien Scarab and Blue Beetle character, as Reyes is not the first character to don this mantle in this universe. But with that, yeah, like I said, with the character himself, the way the powers are introduced and integrated, and some other things that go in between, this movie is tropey. What also adds to that is the villain of the movie, played by Susan Sarandon, the aforementioned villain CEO who is the aunt to Jenny. And I love Sarandon, Oscar-winning actress here. It looked like that she was having a ball in trying to play a character like this, but I don't think she was relishing enough or going too over the top like the character should have been in being this very prejudiced and greedy character. Compared to the likes of, let's say, Helen Mirren from Shazam! Fury of the Gods, another DCEU film, I thought she was more effective in that movie, also because I think she has more experience with bigger budgeted movies like Shazam and the Fast and Furious films. Sarandon, I thought she was trying, but she really didn't click with me entirely in terms of being this character. Same goes with Raul Max Trujillo as her bodyguard, who is basically part cyborg, and he had a backstory which I thought was interesting, making him one of the more intriguing players in the film, but it's not divulged that much until the end of the movie, and by that point, it was already in its third act. He just amounts to basically being the main figure that Reyes fights in suiting up and just going mano y mano. So with that, I think a lot of what this movie could be told in being bogged down by is that, yeah, it's very been there, done that in terms of what we've seen in superhero origin stories. But again, like I've mentioned multiple times already with the cast of characters, it is really held up with the idea in fighting for familia and it being lovingly Latino. When the family angle is played up across the movie, it helps keep it light. I found myself surprisingly caring for these characters, not just because of my own relatability in being somebody of Mexican descent, as I've said. It just goes with how these characters are written. It felt so natural seeing the characters interact with each other, especially in the integration of English and Espanol/Spanish being spoken, which helped maintain that feel. Though I wished the Spanish was not subtitled because, one, not everything that was spoken was translated into subtitles, and two, not everything that was translated was accurate. And I noticed that with having known the language all my life. But I think that a lot of the intricacies that the movie itself doesn't play up with the language will be picked up by fellow Hispanics and Latinos like myself, and it also just helps maintain the movie having this tone that is very easy to get into. I mentioned that the sequence where Jaime gets the scarab on him for the first time plays out like a horror movie, but it is played up for laughs, and the movie has a comedic edge about it that did have me consistently chuckling throughout it, whether it's through character moments or lines of dialogue that I personally noticed because hablo español. It has that focus that I think is maintained here under the directing by Ángel Manuel Soto, and the way that he also handles the action sequences here also fitting in with the tone, initially with Reyes getting his powers and messing with the suit, and then also with the actual fights that he gets into. They are more focused on choreography and the fighting hand-to-hand compared to other superhero movies in recent memory, what with his power set and just also being in the suit, which I thought stood out in some areas. I mean, it's a lot of cannon fodder just being punched and kicked on screen for the Blue Beetle himself, and then also with the bodyguard to the villainous CEO being fought with a bit in the movie. But I thought the energy was kept up with as the movie went along. As I mentioned, the movie was originally supposed to go straight to Max, and at times one could tell with some of the visual effects, but I gotta say that they were better than I initially expected. Yes, one could tell that this did not have the biggest budget, over $100 million, I believe, which is still big for any movie, but for a superhero movie, that is on the lower end. I think that in how they appeared to be more cartoony and rubbery with Reyes in the suit and him going around everywhere, it added somewhat to the charm, I guess, because of how this movie does have that specific tone, like I've mentioned. And then even with that, in just seeing how everything is very electric and has a lot of hues of blue and purple, I thought that stood out because personally I like those colors, and how the movie all comes together with its just over 2-hour running time. I think that it does not overstay its welcome. I think that as a whole, it did feel whole with a lot of moments in between that go for some of the emotion, which again surprised me, like with the whole likability of the lead and his family. If I had a nickel every time I said family or familia in this review. And also with some other technical elements. For a movie that was originally supposed to be straight to streaming, it does have some cinematic sequences. Then the original score, the music here, a lot of popular tracks that fellow Hispanics and Latinos will recognize, but the original score by Bobby Krilic, who previously did the score to 2019's Midsummer, which I thought was quite chilling and haunting. Here, he takes a note out of the playbook of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross from my own interpretation, in that there is an electronic feel to the score, and I thought it helped keep up the whole vibe of the movie in being futuristic, being set in this town, which is trying to gentrify all of the old neighborhoods and other places like the Reyes family are living in, and just trying to embrace the future, like with the villainous CEO. It helped keep up a unique feel that this movie was already going for, and with that, I think the movie, even with some of the misgivings I had with it, in just feeling like, yeah, it is very overdone and that we have seen this all before, but the spin on this, not just with the whole Latino and the whole sense of representing a different culture on the big screen with a comic book / superhero film, I would say that for someone like myself who had middling expectations, the movie rose a bit above them even more in some aspects, and I had a good time with Blue Beetle. This is not my favorite film in the DCEU. It would still be James Gunn's The Suicide Squad from 2021. And speaking of him, he apparently said that Blue Beetle is the first superhero in his new slate of DC movies, even though this is apparently part of the old slate and is going to be wiped along with the upcoming Aquaman sequel. I don't know. Things are still in a huge gray zone right now, and hopefully we'll soon get clarity, and his upcoming Superman Legacy movie is supposed to be the start of the new slate of DC for film. Audiences clearly want the slate wiped clean for DC, and I'm not sure if this necessarily is the movie that is going to give them that. On its own, I do think that it is an enjoyable time, but if you're someone who is just completely out in terms of comic book and superhero movies, this is not going to bring you back. In fact, there are a couple moments in here that I could see people immediately pointing out thematically and visually as already having been done in recent memory with a movie that was released a few months ago without giving away any potential spoilers. Comparing this to other DCEU films we've gotten recently, I would say that I liked The Flash more than this. I liked The Flash more than most people, so take that into account. Also, in comparison to other superhero films from this year, I would say that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, speaking of James Gunn again, and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I think are the two best comic book / superhero films of the year. A couple of my personal favorite movies of the year so far too, but I would say that Blue Beetle is above the likes of Black Adam and Shazam Fury of the Gods in terms of the recent DCEU slate. As with a lot of these movies, be sure to stay for the mid and post-credit scenes if you're gonna head out to see this thing. I do think the film will find an audience, whether now in theaters or eventually when it is available to stream. In any sense, it gets a recommendation from me. My final verdict for Blue Beetle is 3.5 out of 5 stars. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of Blue Beetle, social media links in the description, subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll catch you on the next movie review.